This is Weights and Wealth, your one-stop shop for entertaining education on building a stronger body and bank account.
We are not doctors or financial advisors and must warn you this is not medical or investing advice. It is for your entertainment. Welcome back to another episode of Weights and Wealth. This is the first episode of our post-tax season recording group. And Ted gave me like about a day to recover and then started cracking the whip on the outlines. Because this is, it's April 27th?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So there will be episodes that come out before this that we're recording in this chunk. But yeah.
Yeah. And some of you may also notice that we're back in the OG Studio East.
Yes.
So we're in Charleston for this one. But then we'll have some coming out where we go to Ted's new apartment because Ted just moved to DC, this past week?
Yeah. It was, I moved in 3 days ago.
Okay.
And now I'm back in Charleston.
Yeah. So lots of moving parts. But we'll have a few in DC for, I think those will be coming out probably August or so.
Yeah, July and August. Yeah. But let's get into it. This episode is going to be on tipping and training. Our shout out for this episode goes to Vonnie from Cincinnati, Ohio. She has been texting the podcast to people to share it, and we really appreciate her trying to spread the podcast through word of mouth. That's the best way for us to grow. So thank you, Vonnie.
Yeah, and pretty much every time I talk with Cooper, who we were friends with in college, he tells me how much his mom loves our podcast and is sending it to him. So I think she listens more than he does. But we really appreciate that. All right, this week's wealth wisdom of the week. So kind of to go into like the tipping a little bit. From a macroeconomic level, if you tip based on actual performance, we would probably see better service overall, because then service workers would realize that when, they serve people better, then they'll make more money. And
quick pause. Should we get into the intro article before we do the tipping section?
Well, that was just the wealth wisdom. So
okay.
So I'm just encouraging people, if you care from about doing your part from like a macroeconomic level to improve the economy, you should tip based on performance.
That's good wealth wisdom.
Thank
Sorry
you
for interrupting.
You're good. You're good.
Shows how good of a listener I am, I guess. All right, let's move on to the intro article. We've got basically some side-by-side articles here from 2020 timeframe and then later 2023, 2024 timeframe that just kind of shows the difference that a couple of years can make. I think a lot of us kind of knew from our own research in 2020 what is now being put out around COVID. But we'll just show this discrepancy just so that I think it's a good reminder that the news isn't always telling you necessarily the truth, or even if they do think they're telling you the truth, it's good to do your own research on topics because they might be misled by the corporate interests that run the news. And I think that's where podcasts are becoming so helpful to just the knowledge of the everyday person, because they're able to get their information from not these corporate entities that are concerned about what their advertisers will think about the information that they put out.
Yeah, it kind of just like removed the gatekeeping, because, it's really hard to, or I don't know about really hard, but, this has to go through like different levels for these types of articles to actually be published, whereas anybody can just pick up a mic and throw something on Spotify. Yeah,
and there's so many stories. The one that comes to mind off the top of my head is when Jake Tapper was interviewing RFK. This was like early to mid 2000s. Jake Tapper was getting into the whole side effects of vaccines issue and vaccine safety. And he did spend a bunch of time interviewing RFK, and RFK gave him a bunch of research. And then right before it was about to air, Jake Tapper told him, "Hey, I'm sorry, the network said no, we have to abandon this." It's like that happens all the time in the corporate media. And I mean, now CNN gets like 200,000 viewers since Tucker left Fox. I don't know what their viewership is like on an average program, but it's like less than 1 million probably outside of their top show, whatever it is. So
yeah,
podcasts, I mean, Joe Rogan, this was like 2 years ago, he's getting 11 million per episode. So a lot of podcasts are way more influential than the news, but we'll get into some of these side by sides. The first one we've got is from July of 2020. More than half of U.S. states have statewide mask mandates. So that's a couple months into the pandemic. And then now in February 14th, 2023, face masks made little to no difference in preventing spread of COVID. And there's a study attached to that. The next one is from March 27th, 2020. So this is really like 3 weeks into the pandemic when shutdowns had started. Sorry, conspiracy theorists. Study concludes COVID-19 is not a laboratory construct. Oh, how the times have changed. USA Today on March 2nd, 2023. COVID may have leaked out of a Chinese lab after all. So much for misinformation.
Yeah, and like one thing, especially in that first headline, is that they are just very confidently wrong, which you can see in like the, you know, like the verbiage that they use, like study concludes, like it is certain. Whereas, and then
3 weeks in.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's not enough time to collect enough data and like properly analyze it. Like
it isn't, but also like in March of 2020, I was putting out on my Instagram old studies of masks, including one that was authored by Dr. Fauci that showed that masks do not work to stop these kinds of viruses. And specifically the Dr. Fauci study, which was a study previous to COVID, it was on Spanish flu and how some of the people that died during Spanish flu actually died because of the masks and getting pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia from the masks they were wearing.
Really?
So I was putting that out on my Instagram, and a lot of my friends or people I thought were friends that were going to med school or in med school were sending me really nasty DMs saying I didn't know what I was talking about. And I was like, well, read this study. And they wouldn't, but, so like you can do your own research, and 3 weeks in, you might not have a lot to go off of, but sometimes there's other sources of information out there, on similar topics. So the next one we've got is 6 feet far enough for social distancing? Here's what science says. And that is August of 2020 when 6 feet social distancing was the craze and we had the stickers on the floors everywhere. Then January 10th, 2024, COVID 6 feet social distancing sort of just appeared, likely lacked scientific basis, Fauci admits.
Yeah, because especially with like 6 feet, like that's such like a concrete hard number that like what if I'm like, 5.5 feet, like is that extra 6 inches going to make all the difference?
Yeah. I don't know. It's also like with the social distancing and the mask, like early on in the pandemic, I've heard people say like, well, early on in the pandemic, you didn't want to scare people, so it was good to stay away. But I didn't really have that same approach. I don't know. Were you like staying away from people and wearing a mask in the beginning?
Well, yeah, in the beginning I was, because I don't think anybody really knew exactly what it was, how harmful it was, and I think especially in the beginning, it's better to be safe than sorry. I mean, you can still go too far in the beginning, I think, but I was definitely on the safer side. I think like I wouldn't have gone probably too close to my grandparents, especially because they were more worried about it.
At risk.
Yeah.
And then the last one we've got here is, and this is all Liberty Counsel put all of this up on Instagram. But the last one we've got is from March of 2021. Vaccines stop COVID-19 infection, but here's why you still need to wear a mask. And then now we've got, actually this isn't even that recent. This is June of 2022. Vaccines don't prevent COVID. And the whole snowball of that. Vaccines are 100% effective, 96% effective, 91% effective, 86% they're 70% effective. Oh, well, they don't stop it, but you won't spread it. Oh, well, you'll still spread. It's just like, It was so funny to just see that unravel. But yeah, this is not really one specific article. It's kind of a collection of articles that Liberty Counsel put up, and we'll attach that link. But these articles are all from different sources, so I don't read a whole lot of like mainstream articles, but they could have, like Wall Street Journal, I imagine, is a more conservative.
outlet,
there's
whereas
definitely
time
a
is
spread.
not.
So
I just think that's something we got to point out.
Yeah, there is some of those second ones were New York Post, but you also have USA Today, and even more recently, you've seen on more left-sided news outlets that they're starting to walk back kind of the mistakes of COVID. Not to mention, I think a separate whole episode we could do is the economic impacts of the things they did to us during COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that a lot of people that have voted for Trump in the past will not vote for him again because he was just as bad as the Democrats in contributing to inflation. So there's definitely a lot to go into there economically, but
and then the social impacts too, like mental health, like
schools,
the toll,
kids.
Yeah. So
yeah. All right. Well, now we can get into a fun job that I picked up. So with the move from Tennessee to DC, my wife and I were discussing, we're going to have to cover like our mortgage before a tenant moves in. We're probably going to have like a month where we're going to have to pay the mortgage while we're also paying rent in DC, which is super expensive, before the Army switches my pay over to being in DC, and also a security deposit for that rent, which is more than double our mortgage. Tennessee's way cheaper than DC. So it was like all these costs we were looking at paying right when we were moving. The U-Haul, like so many costs where we decided, okay, we need to build up a little more of a nest egg so we don't have to deplete our entire savings. So I wound up getting a job delivering pizzas because I saw a flyer for it when I was on base, and I was like, oh, that wouldn't be too bad. I can just do it on the weekends and make some extra cash to help build up that little slush fund. So started delivering pizzas, and this is where the tipping idea for this episode came in. So when I started delivering pizzas, on the first night that I started to notice vastly different trends in tipping. And so I started keeping in my notes on my phone after a run, if it fell into like a certain category. Got different categories I kept track of, such as gamers, big office orders, people that were clearly smoking weed when I showed up. So there's some different categories we'll go through, but if it was like a certain category I felt, then I would make note of it and write down the tip amount, and we'll go through some of that data, which is pretty interesting. Unfortunately, I didn't keep like a ton of data, so I don't know what my average tip was or anything like that outside of these categories, which are a very small sample size. Anything else, Mr. Statistics over there, that we should keep in mind about this?
No, I mean, it's still like a fun little social experiment. You know, we really can't draw any like conclusions from this. But like one thing I did want to point out is that I also think it tells a bit of a story about who's ordering pizza, because we see who pops up more than others. Like, I mean, is weed legal in Tennessee?
I think so. I mean,
is it?
I don't know. I don't smoke weed, so I never.
Yeah.
It has to be. Yeah.
Okay.
I assume so.
But like, it's just funny that like weed smokers, like you have, I think that they were almost your customers the most. Yeah. But and then also never
tipped. But that's the other thing. They weren't my customers the most. Like my most average customer was just a family, but I didn't include like just a regular family of four that I showed up to in this category.
Gotcha.
These were like specific, interesting categories.
Okay.
So let's just jump right into some of my experience from Luigi's. So we're going to go in order from smallest average tip up to biggest average tip from these categories I kept track of. So the first one is when I showed up and felt that maybe they had a pet skunk in the house. Right? So for people that were obviously smoking weed when I showed up, the tips came out to 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, $1.16. Which is a grand average of 17 cents per order there.
That's funny. Yeah. No, I mean, to me, at least, that kind of makes sense. I mean, you know, there's that, you know, association between people who smoke weed and just kind of being bums. So
if you smoke weed, Nick just called you a bum.
Not everybody. I mean, it's a stereotype, but I think it holds true more often than not.
The next category we have is third shift workers. So I had 5 that I ordered 2 that were third shift workers at like a factory at around like 11 or 12 at night. And that was 0, 0, 3.42, 2.91, and 0. Average tip, $1.27. I think that honestly, one of the reasons that the tips here were on the very low end is oftentimes when I would show up, despite like I had this whole system down from, just being in sales with personal training and having read How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Great book if you haven't read it. But like I would look at the run slip, I would see their name, and then I would make sure that when I went up, I said, "Oh, hello, so-and-so, like I'm here with your pizza, blah, 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 whatever." And then I would try to ask them like a couple questions about like what they were doing based off what they were wearing. If they had a dog, talk like, I'd just try to make like 1 or 2 questions, quick conversation, and be friendly and use their name so that I could get a bigger tip, which often I think works compared to some of the other delivery drivers. But with the third shift workers, oftentimes they were kind of just like grumpy and not really entertaining any conversation compared to other orders. And I think that just makes sense. Like third shift is not good for your sleep schedule. It's been labeled basically a carcinogen. So I think that makes sense. And I think that that's probably why, like their mood probably impacted the tip level.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't think about it from that angle, because when I was originally going through these and like jotting my opinions down, generally I found that more middle class people and upper middle class who have some expendable income tend to be more generous with it. Mm-hmm. Whereas it's more like the lower part of the upper class that tend to be really, really stingy with their money. So that's why this surprised me a little bit. But your explanation, I think, makes sense.
Yeah. And that's a very reasonable conclusion to draw. I was kind of surprised when delivering that it didn't exactly shake out that way. Like you'd think, oh, when I go off exit 11 to these neighborhoods with these huge houses, like that's where the tips are being made. But that wasn't really the case. A lot of times that would just be an average tip. And it was just if I showed up and the person was super friendly, they would give me a tip. It was more like I could tell by their mood than the house they lived in or the apartment they lived in, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah. One of the really interesting things I get to see in my job is like I do tax returns. So I know how much people make, and we have, clients on the low end of the spectrum and, clients on the very, very, very high end of the spectrum. And it's just kind of interesting to draw like associations between the different, income levels. Are
you saying you can see how much they contribute to charity and stuff like that? Mm-hmm. And what do you find with that? Is it more in line with the conclusion you drew on the third shift workers?
So, honestly, I haven't really looked at that a whole lot. Especially with our more wealthy clients, they tend to either give nothing or be extremely generous. Yeah. So it's kind of like the two extremes. Mm-hmm. I haven't really thought about that in particular. Yeah. But yeah.
Moving on to the next, this is the gamer. So show up, they've got maybe a controller in their hand and a gaming headset on, and you can kind of tell by the look that they're a gamer. But
they got Cheeto dust on their fingers.
Yeah, just you. Yeah. We all know what we're talking about here. So, with this first order specifically, this will forever be seared into my brain. I go. It's a $0 tip, but I go to this house on top of this hill, and it's like $110, $120 order. So generally, I'm thinking, okay, maybe like low end 10%. You don't want to think about the tips you're going to get on the big orders, because then you might be let down. But at the same time, you can't really help yourself, because when you're getting like $0 tips sometimes, and then you're getting like $3 to $4 tips a lot of $7 tips kind of in there on the $50 to $60 orders when they order a few different pizzas. When you get $100 order, you're like, oh yeah, maybe I'm getting $20 here, which when you have a lot of orders, that adds up $20 compared to $3. So I go to this house, $110, $120 order, multiple pizzas and drinks and everything. And it was the weirdest interaction I've maybe ever had. So the guy used a credit card. So I gave him his receipt and everything and asked him to fill out and sign. And he just signed his name, but he didn't fill out the tip and total section. So then I was like, excuse me, can you just fill out this part so that I can charge a card correctly? And he says, okay, yeah, sure. Just give me a minute. Takes the receipt, goes in the house for like 3 minutes. I'm just waiting out there. Already gave him the pizza. And then he comes back out and he didn't fill anything out. Didn't fill out the tip and total section. And I was like, do you want me to like write in $0 here or like, I need to fill this out. And then I told him like, you should really fill these out whenever someone delivers. Cause if you get someone that is maybe really like hurting for cash or in a bad mood, you never know. They could write a tip in for you that you don't want to give. And so he went back inside again for like another 4 minutes and comes back out and wrote $0 on it. It's just like, wow.
What was he doing in there? Do you think?
I don't know. Yeah, it was weird. Everything about the interaction was super weird. But for the gamer category, we have that $0 tip and then a $2, $5, and $0. And the average there came out to $1.75. So again, that's pretty low category. Yeah.
Yeah. Which that
similar conclusion to the weed smoking, I guess, probably for Nick.
Yeah.
Next category we've got is drunk, and this is there's more deviation in this one, higher standard deviation for sure. So totals, the tips here were $6, $9.87, $0, $2.21, and $0, with an average of $3.61. So $6 and $9.87. Those are both like good average upper end tips, but then you also get the low end there. And I guess it just kind of depends if they're thinking about it or not.
Yeah. No, that's what I would expect. I would expect, a lot of zeros and, a few really high tips and then, some average ones.
Yeah. This next one is a really small sample size. If I showed up to a farm or homestead, there was one specifically that had a bunch of chickens, so I got to say hi to the chickens. But this was $7.47 and $12.61. So average there of $10.04, which is definitely like above that's not just like a slightly higher than average. That's like above that, definitely. So those were good tips.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what I would have guessed for this one. I mean, maybe I probably wouldn't have guessed that high, but I think if you have a farm or homestead, you tend to be, more down to earth and kind of, I would think empathetic, but
yes, it's again, small sample size. This next one was probably the most surprising out of this whole thing. So the next one was, I also didn't expect to show up to this many houses, but if they had a Confederate flag hanging up, the tips were $10, $15, $12.64, $10, and $10. So high average, $11.53, and the floor there was $10. So I don't know. I would not have expected that.
I wouldn't have guessed that either. Yeah. I mean, just judging off stereotypes, I mean, Ted is probably someone with a Confederate flag would, naturally like. No, I'm not saying like that. No, don't mean it like that. You're military. You are. I mean, were you driving Randall?
I was driving my truck. Yeah.
So he was in a big old truck. Just someone who's that's. I wasn't taking it from the angle. I think you were thinking.
No. Like that. Like I'm white, obviously. So that is like an interesting.
That too.
Like I wonder if other people would have had the same experience if they weren't white. If the tips would have been lower, that would have been super interesting. If we had data on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. The final one we've got here is the big office orders. So when I showed up to like Hancock Tire or Jostens or something, and they had several sheet pizzas. These are typically, or the hospital, these are orders that are like $150 around that range, $200. But these were nice tips. These were $29, $37.57, and $10. And all the delivery drivers are always psyched when they get one of these big orders because they know it's usually going to be a bigger tip. One of the churches every Sunday would order a bunch of sheet pizzas for their volunteers. And every delivery driver knew that if you got that order, you were getting a $75 tip every time.
Wow.
Yeah. So those big orders with several sheet pizzas are the good ones to get, as long as you don't mind carrying it.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense because they're bigger orders, so you're going to get a larger percentage. And then also, if you're not spending your own money and you're also a business and you want to have a good reputation, and if you start being stingy with delivery drivers, then, you could develop a bad reputation.
Yeah. If you're one of the big churches in town and you start tipping like the weed smokers and the gamers here.
Yeah.
It's not a very good look. All right. Nick's got some stats here on tipping for the wealth portion of this episode. You want to get into those, Nick?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just found something. It's like, what percent of the time do you tip? And I'll just run through the most likely to least likely real quick. And some of it did surprise me. So it's restaurant servers, food delivery. So, but that's like pizza. And then I imagine that's also Uber Eats. And I would imagine the two are different.
Yeah. It says groceries included in that. So it's got to be Uber Eats.
Then hairdressers and barbers, then rideshare, then baristas, then hotel housekeeping, then furniture and appliance delivery, then when picking up takeout, and then home service and repair people.
Let's run through these stats real quick. Let's just go down the list. Give them. There's 4 different categories here. There's always tipping, most of the time, sometimes, and never. So let's just go through and give people the always and the never on each category real quick.
Okay. So restaurant servers is 65 always, and it looks to be about 5% never. Food delivery is 50 always, and then 7% never. Barbers, 53% always, and 9% never. Rideshare is 40% always, 13 never. Baristas, 22 always. Then they also have 26 most of the time and 30 sometimes, which is a bigger range than the other ones.
Yeah.
23 never. Hotel housekeeping is 23 always, 25 never. Appliance delivery is 17% always, 38 never. Picking up takeout is 13 always, 35 never. And home service people is 10% always, 48 never.
Want to go through and talk about each of these real quick, just our thoughts on it. Yeah. And maybe we can include like how we think we tip with each of these categories as well. So restaurant servers. Okay. I've also got a good anecdote here on the restaurant servers. 65% always. That's surprising.
I thought it was surprisingly low.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of people do?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think what's got to be included in that is some people are thinking, oh, well, this one time I had this really bad server and I didn't give them a tip. So I'm most of the time and not always. So that might be where we're seeing those percentages fall into line there. But 5% never tipping restaurant servers. Who are these people?
Yeah, I don't know. Like,
these people work for tips. Same with food delivery. So that is really surprising. But
yeah, well, okay. I'll say my own personal anecdote for the food delivery is that for when I originally started doing Uber Eats, I wasn't really thinking about it, and then I was like, oh, I probably should be tipping them because I don't know how their pay works. I imagine it's higher than servers. I imagine they get at least minimum wage, probably more.
No.
Because they're 1099 like an Uber driver is, I think. But now I just do a standard $2 tip. Doesn't matter the size of the order. If it is something like pizza, I will tip higher. Yeah. But yeah.
For restaurant servers, Alex and I we were eating out more right before the move since we packed up our kitchen stuff and we're running out of food in our fridge and didn't want to buy more. But we had like 4 really bad server experiences in a row. And like one, we were out with our friends that came from Memphis to see us before we left Tennessee. And we were at this Mexican restaurant that we went to a lot and had a good experience with. When I say a lot, I mean like if we went out to eat, that is where we went. But we had this new waitress there that was extremely rude, like threw straws at us when she didn't give us straws and we asked for them, just like threw them down on the table and rolled her eyes at Alex and was like just very disrespectful to everyone at the table. It was crazy. It's like, you're working for tips. Why would you treat people this way?
Right.
But
well, could partially be because people don't actually tip based on service, which, I mean, imagine when it's that bad.
Oh, I
she's
tip
getting
based on service.
Lower tips. I don't as much as I should. So that wealth wisdom was mainly for me.
I tip very much based on service. Like 20% is typically what I give. But if they're like really good, especially if they're making an effort and if they're adding to the experience at all, I'm going up towards like 25. We did this the other night when we went to this new distillery with Katie and she was helping us move. But like really, really good waitress. She was increasing the experience of us eating out. So I'm going to give more than my standard tip there. And then if someone just like messes up something or something like that, I'm not going to dock them that 20%. If they're like rude and they're like actively trying to sabotage themselves, I will lower that percentage, and I will sometimes make a note on, and so will Alex. Alex is not afraid to like write something on the receipt like, hey,
what's going on?
What are you doing? But yeah, so I would rarely eat at a restaurant and not give a tip. Like even when we had that really bad waitress at that Mexican restaurant, I think we still gave her like 5%. Like to give a $0 tip, you have to like really do something bad. But like I'd say it's rare that I'm outside of like 15 to 25. And the vast majority of the time, it's like 20%.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually what I had written down. I don't know if you see my notes, but
no, I don't.
I almost always tip 20%. But if someone goes to like the extremes, I won't lower it or higher it by that much. But I think I kind of should. Like I've never had that experience, which
it was bad. Yeah.
In that case, I might do 5 or maybe even 0. I don't know. But
food delivery, I guess we've already covered with Luigi's, but hairdressers and barbers. I usually give like a $2 or $3 tip on a $14 haircut. I don't really care that much about my hair, and I just go to the PX on base and have the cheapest haircut, cheaper than Great Clips. So
yeah,
as you guys can see.
Oh, actually, funny story about my haircut recently is during tax season. I really only had time to get my haircut on Sundays, and in Charleston, very few places are open on Sundays. Yeah. But I found one in North Charleston, brand new barbershop.
Shout out? Should we give a shout out?
Well, here. I imagine that a white guy is not their typical clientele.
Oh, okay.
So, they aren't used to cutting hair like mine.
Okay.
But it was like $60 or $65. And I was like, this is absolutely outrageous. I still, because I always tip 20% for hairdressers. Because, I like you, I don't really care about my hair that much. I did not think it would be that expensive.
Yeah.
But it didn't turn out good. I had to finish the job when I got home.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah.
There's another barbershop like that here in Somerville that I went. It's like across from a high school. I don't remember the name of it. But last time we were recording down here, I got my haircut there right before, and it was one of the best haircuts I've ever gotten. I think they were a little confused when I walked in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, my barber didn't speak English, only Spanish.
Well, in Milwaukee, I would intentionally go to the Spanish barbershops in Milwaukee to practice my Spanish.
Oh, really?
So I was getting out of practice because I took it throughout high school, kind of got out of practice in college, but then I went to Guatemala. And that helped me become better than I'd ever been in high school. But then throughout the rest of college, I started to lose it. So when we were living in Milwaukee together, I would go to the Spanish barbershop.
Yeah.
Say, do you mind if I only speak in Spanish to try to practice?
Oh, yeah.
And they would be like, okay. And then I wouldn't be able to talk very much.
But yeah, I mean, he just left it way too long on top, which I think is more the style for Hispanics. Okay. Which, I mean, it's also kind of my fault for not telling him to cut it more. But I also like getting in and out, and it had already been like 35 minutes. And I was like, I'll just do it at home.
Yeah.
But that one surprised me because I always tip like 20% for that.
I guess it also there's probably like, this is actually pretty bad. And I guess I'm guilty of this because I usually give like a $2 or $3 tip on a 14, which is, no, I guess that's that's less than 20%.
Which I honestly don't know what's standard for that.
Yeah, I don't either. But like, I got to imagine the Great Clips, Sports Cuts, PX Barbershop brings this stat down. I feel like if you're going to like a $60 haircut kind of barbershop or high, I mean, there's a lot higher than that. But if you're going to a place like that you think of as more of like a small business, you're tipping higher. So that kind of stinks because then the people that are the low end, maybe skilled and are working in like a Great Clips instead of more of like a boutique barbershop, they're getting tipped less, which kind of that's not very good, but that probably skews that stat. Taxi rideshare drivers 40% always, 13% never. I feel like 3 or 4 years ago Uber came out with tipping. It wasn't always a thing, was it? It was like a new feature at one point.
I don't think so. I didn't know it was that common to tip them. Honestly, I've maybe tipped like my Uber driver once. Taxi driver, yeah. But
it's funny there's a difference there.
It is, yeah. I mean, same with like the food, like a pizza, like a pizza guy versus Uber Eats. Like I would tip them differently. I don't know why.
It's funny, yeah.
But
I guess one you feel as like more like a small business, and one you feel is like this big corporation.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, honestly,
even though it doesn't matter to the person that's getting tipped.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Baristas, here we go. The flip.
Yeah, so this one was 22 always and 23 never. I used to tip like $1 on a coffee. I kind of stopped doing that because I think if they're not really providing you a service, then I mean they're especially me. I'm getting black coffee. I'm
getting a cup of black coffee, and sometimes you pour it yourself.
Right.
So it's like,
yeah.
What are we doing here? You handed me a cup, and your screen says 10-20% are custom. Like,
yeah, I know. It's
you handed me a cup.
It's getting a little out of control.
Those memes and little short sketches on social media, though, of people like asking for a tip with that flip thing over the past few years, especially like during COVID. Those are so good.
Do you have any good ones? I know I saw some ones that were hilarious, but I feel
like Trevor Wallace had some good ones.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I don't know if I could name any.
Like I think he was like on a date or something, and then at the end he was like, "So how was your experience today?" They had a little tip thing.
Yeah, there's so many of them. But yeah, I guess with that one, if you order black coffee, you don't have to tip. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's, like we've been talking about with like the small business, big corporation, there's probably a difference here that people tip between Starbucks and a local little mom and pop coffee shop. So I don't know. Hotel housekeeping, furniture, picking up takeout. We want to skip those. I feel like those aren't as, you got anything on those?
Yeah. I mean, like I would always tip a mover. I think that's pretty common.
Yeah.
But that's one that wasn't really on the list. Home service and repair people. I'm surprised that some people are always tipping them.
I always. Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Just like a plumber?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm home when they're there, which is usually most of the time, typically I've already tried to do it myself. So most of the time the times where I had to call someone, like one time, even though I've replaced GFCI outlets before, there's one in our kitchen. I replaced most of the outlets in our house when we moved in because we had a really bad inspector, I guess, that didn't do a very good job.
I remember that.
Yeah, so I had to replace most of the outlets. Not most, but probably like 40% of the outlets. And my buddy that had moved into a house a month earlier, I helped him upgrade his house a little bit and replaced outlets, including GFCI outlets. But the one in our kitchen I could not get for some reason. So I had to call an electrician. I was like, really, I got to drop like $100 for this outlet that I know how to fix. Like, it's frustrating. But so most of the time, in the plumber too, like when we had an issue with our dishwasher and sink, I had done some of the work myself, installed the dishwasher, but there was this issue. And so if I've already done some of the work, I'm there with them, like explaining what I've done. And they're usually trying to bring down the cost of it because they're not doing the full job for me. So they'll usually like manipulate the order a little bit to bring down the price, and I'll tip them.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a you scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of situation.
Okay. Yeah. I've never owned a home, so I've never had to call a repair person like that. Maybe I would tip them. I don't know. What? What is?
It's an army joke about, but it's not. Yeah.
Okay.
Not for the pod.
All right.
I'll tell you after.
Tell me after.
All right. Moving on. Should we move on?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So spent quite a lot of time on tipping. I'm not sure where we're at on the time here, but moving on to training. So we've got some stats essentially for having a trainer. There's not a lot of good research on how having a trainer impacts your level of success, but there's a lot of good anecdote from people that have trained hundreds of people. So, and typically you have kind of a before and after, because oftentimes people will start out without a trainer, get frustrated, and then get a trainer. Or they'll plateau and get a trainer. So you kind of have this anecdote of seeing how people achieve success without and with a trainer. So I guess talk to a personal trainer that will then try to sell you on personal training. So there's this bias there. So I wish we had more research, but I'll just go through a few. First, I'm going to start with an article from University of Michigan. It's from 2017 by Marshall Runge, and it goes through how 90% of people that lose weight regain the weight. And this is a statistic you commonly hear in this space, and it kind of shows why most people need a trainer. Because most people are doing things that are counterproductive to their goals to lose weight. And that is why they regain the weight. So when you have 90% of people regaining their weight, how do most of those people lose weight? A lot of it is cardio and slashing calories, because that's what they've been told for the past 30 years is going to help them lose weight. Their doctor says, oh, you should probably start running, start exercising. But most doctors for the past couple decades haven't been saying, oh, you should go take up bodybuilding and powerlifting and lift some weights, go squat and bench and overhead press. That's not what doctors say. So when you see people regain the weight, a lot of it is unsustainable diets, which we've talked about on this show before. When we've talked about fad diets, we had one episode where we went into like negative things in the fitness industry. And I kind of did a little trick and put carnivore on there as a negative, because it was unsustainable for most people. I'm not sure if you remember that episode.
Yeah, I do.
But like, even though carnivores had a positive effect for so many people, I kind of put it in there as a negative just to explain that so many people try it and then it's unsustainable for them. And then they go back to how they were eating or worse. So a lot of this with 90% of people regaining weight, well, if they try this extreme diet and then they can't sustain it, they give up and go back to what they were eating before. And that's why they regain the weight. And then with cardio, when people lower their metabolism through just doing a bunch of cardio, well, of course you're going to regain the weight at some point, because now your metabolism's lower. That's the opposite of what we want to do. That's why we want to lift, so we can increase our metabolism.
Yeah, I mean, one thing kind of on that is like, people talk to me, they see how much I eat. You know, I'm eating easily in the 3,000 calories a day range. And they're like, oh, it's because you're 25 and you have a fast metabolism.
Yeah, it's your genetics.
It's part of it, but you know, being younger, but I also have a lot of muscle mass that burns a lot of calories.
Yeah.
So unless I'm like, sometimes I'll lose weight without trying. Like, and that's kind of what happened recently. I'm under 190 now, which I haven't been in a little while, but I was up at 200 in like January.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. And similar to that point, but kind of on the opposite side, with not having as much muscle and the cardio side of things. On The Biggest Losers, this is in the Michigan article, and this is why I wanted to talk about this first. So they brought up some stats from The Biggest Loser. So I guess they followed people throughout a season, or maybe this is multiple seasons, and then kept up with them afterwards. But before competing on The Biggest Loser, this population that they had on the show, their TDE, which is basically your metabolism, total daily energy expenditure, was 2,607 calories a day. So 2,600 before the competition. After the competition, it was all the way down to 2,000 calories a day. So these people lost a bunch of weight on The Biggest Loser because they're doing all these intense workouts and cardio and everything and slashing their calories, and then they're lowering their metabolism. So it's going to be harder to keep weight off, harder to lose weight, and much easier to gain that weight back. So then 6 years later, with the same population that went from 2,600 to 2,000 calories a day metabolism, most of the people had regained the weight, and the average TDEE was 1,900 calories a day. So it continued to lower. And I would theorize that a lot of those people probably tried to keep working out the way they were working out in The Biggest Loser and doing like cardio and stuff, and their metabolism just kept dropping.
Wow. So it continued to go down, but they put on weight.
Most of them regained the weight.
Yeah.
Or like even if, so say it's at 2,000 and then it levels out, but then you can't sustain the diet you were on because you like McDonald's and you don't like salads that they're making you eat. Okay, well, now you're going to regain the weight, but your metabolism isn't going to increase because you're not lifting and doing these and gaining muscle. Doing these things are going to help increase your metabolism. And this is just really, I think, like the crux of the whole weight gain issue is that people are putting in a lot of effort. They're trying to change their diet. They're trying to work out and do cardio and these HIIT classes, like we've talked about, the group fitness classes, and they're doing these things. They're putting in a bunch of effort and they're trying to lose weight, but their metabolism is going in the wrong direction. So then they're gaining weight, or they're losing it, but then they're gaining it back. And it's just so discouraging for those people that are putting in that amount of effort and changing their lifestyle to not see the results they want. And the main problem is that people have been misled on how to do this properly. And that's where having a trainer that has gotten results with other people and knows how to help you is just so valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of like the other things about being a trainer is that they're also there to encourage you. And these programs like The Biggest Loser, those are really, really hard. And, you know, if you're someone, which I think a lot of people are that tend to be all or nothing, you know, if you're doing this 100% and kind of pushing yourself past your limits a little bit and you're not enjoying your life, then you're going to likely eventually fall back to how you were before and go back to nothing. Whereas, I mean, I've talked about it before, but like the 80-20 rule kind of tends to hold true in like a lot of situations. Yeah. So, you know, just like, I'm not going to say no to going out to eat just because I won't eat well. That's part of the 20%. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. I actually have a study on that, on the mental side of things. So let's see which one it is. Okay. It is this one. So 2003 study, the effectiveness of personal training on changing attitudes towards physical activity. So they basically took 129 people and they broke them down into 5 tiers. These tiers ranged from non-contemplation of changing their lifestyle and working out to change their body fat percentage and lean mass. So non-contemplation, not even really thinking about it, all the way up to sustaining change and in between.
Is this what they wanted? Is this like their goal?
Yeah. So they just took 129 people and they're like, how do you feel about training, like, and exercising and changing your diet? And some of them answered that they weren't even thinking about it. Some that they were thinking about it. Some that they were wanted to make a change but haven't succeeded. Some that they were actively making a change, and then others that they were sustaining a change. Okay. So before this, so at the beginning of the study, like before the program started, and this was 10 weeks long, so really short. This is one of the problems with like every study ever done on fitness and training is that they're usually 8 to 12 week studies. But they started with 129 people, and in the first category, non-contemplation, you had 2 people, and then in the next one, 26, then 62, then 12, and then 27 in the highest tier of sustaining change. And those numbers shifted at the end of the 10 weeks after they were working with a trainer for 10 weeks. So went from the first tier of non-contemplation went from 2 to 0. So after working with a trainer, everyone was thinking about making a change, which makes sense. The next level of wanting to make a change went from 26 to 5 people. The next level of trying but not succeeding went from 62 to 28. The fourth level of actively making a change went from 12 to 65. So you've got this distribution that just shifts all the way up basically into actively making a change and having success. And then the top one went from 27 to 31 of sustaining positive change. So this whole population of 129 people basically just shifted to the right towards actively making a change and sustaining that positive change. So I think that's kind of like a weird study when you look at it with like the different breakdown, the 5 different kind of categories. It's kind of like a strange way to measure, I guess. But when you actually look at the numbers, it shows really positive things for working with a trainer.
Yeah.
Next study I've got here is from 2000, author Mazzetti, not to be confused with one of the greatest speakers of our generation, Dom Mazzetti.
I know that name. Yeah. I don't know who it is,
you know
though.
That name. From Instagram, he's, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this study was on having direct supervision. So they took 12 weeks. They had some people work with a trainer and some people just try to make change without a trainer. Over the course of this 12 weeks, both groups on average improved in a bunch of different metrics. They had squat, bench, body fat percentage, lean mass, all these different categories that they were measuring, or all these different metrics rather. The group that was supervised or working with a trainer throughout these 12 weeks, one of the interesting points that it showed was during their training, they used significantly higher loads. So they were using heavier weights and probably using more intensity, getting closer to failure during the training sessions than the people that were working without a trainer. So that's where the trainer will push you comes into play, or the trainer that's experienced in working with hundreds of people knows how far you can push yourself. And even if you think, so a lot of people will train the same way for a very long time. Oh, what do you use for lateral raises? Oh, I use 15s. How long have you been using 15s for? Oh, like the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. What are you doing?
Yeah.
But that's how so many people train. Like they have this thing that they do where they go into the gym and they use 135 pounds for this, and they use 40-pound dumbbells for this, and they don't increase the load over time. Working with a trainer, they're going to have you increasing load over time. Progressive overload. Like that's like foundational stuff.
But that's surprising to me, because even when I was 16 and just started lifting, everybody was trying to increase the weight they were moving.
Yes, but you have to look at who you, Nick Rafferty, 16 years old, are compared to the person that gets into the gym at 28 or the 50-year-old woman that gets in the gym and starts lifting and someone tells her what to do, like a friend or something, or son, daughter, whatever. Like there's a big difference there. You're a high testosterone teenager that's trying to get strong and big, and there's a mental difference there with increasing weight.
That's true, because also, I mean, I guess I was going there to get stronger. Some people just go to improve their health.
Yeah, exactly. And the people that are just going there to lift because they've heard resistance training is good for them, they're probably not in that same mindset of progressive overload.
Yeah, which honestly, kind of recently, I'm going to try to make the switch from just trying to lift as much weight as possible to my health. Like they're very similar in the same vein.
They bring you on the same path, but they're different, right? It's like two kind of parabolas going diagonally up a graph that go in different directions and cross. For people listening, I'll illustrate what I mean there. If you're not that math inclined, or if you don't think I explained it well. But at the end of the 12-week program, the clients that were with a trainer that were using more weight. Big shock. They had better increases in bench and squat, higher rates of muscle gain, fat loss. It makes sense, right? So if you are struggling, find a trainer and go listen to our episode. You can DM us and ask us to send it to you, but go back and listen to the episode where we talk about red flags in personal trainers so that you're getting a good personal trainer, because not all personal trainers are created equal. And there's a lot of people out there that like being in the gym, so they become a personal trainer, but they might not be the best trainer. And even more so on social media is even bigger with that. Like, they were able to post pictures of themselves looking really good and gain a large following, and now they're a personal trainer.
Yeah.
Be careful.
And I also kind of wanted to draw the parallel between a trainer and a personal finance advisor, because they are different. I kind of think that, at least in my view, the only time you should get a financial advisor is if you are not good with your money. Like, they can do like that mental aspect and like help you invest. But generally speaking, you'll get better returns on your own if you have some semblance of knowledge from listening to this podcast.
Yeah. Like we have one acquaintance that is not very good with his money, even though he makes a lot. And he is someone that would benefit from that.
Yeah. And I told him I would do it for free, and because I just want to help the guy. But yeah, he actually did say to me the other day that because I mentioned it to him, and he was like, oh, no. And then, like a month later, he was like, hey, I might actually want you to help me out. So,
but that's gets us into a whole nother topic of a lot of times when people make more money, they're not going to be any wealthier over the long term because they're spending all of it. So, but we've talked about that before. So we'll leave you guys there. But
yeah, one other plug I want to make is that the Testosterone Ebook that Ted wrote is still on our website. So you just got to go there, put your email in, and then we will send it to you.
Yep. I haven't looked at the numbers in a little while on that, but we've had a lot of really good feedback on that. It's like 35 pages of how to naturally increase your testosterone levels by 69%. That is a real number from my blood work. So it's not just a catchy title. We had some questions about that. Is this a gimmick? No. This is, if you read the ebook, it's in there. These are the numbers.
I feel like we should have changed the data by a little bit. But anyway, that's what it was.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us today at Weights and Wealth. And don't forget to apply today's lessons to live healthy and wealthy.
If this conversation will contribute to your fitness and financial gains, please share it with a friend or family member and give a 5-star review so more people can lift bigger weights and get bigger bank accounts.